Absolutely nothing beats windshield time, a road trip, and good conversation in the car. Welcome to another episode of Dan the Road Trip Guy, where we have entertaining conversations about cars and road trips, life lessons, and maybe every now and then a little advice. I'm your host, Dan Neal, road trip extraordinaire, and now buckle up and enjoy the show. I am on a virtual road trip today. My guest, actually, he just finished what sounds like an epic road trip out west. I met him on One Lap of America, just like I've met a few other people many years ago. His name is Robin Sparrow, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more about him because we've probably only seen each other a handful of times over the past, 17 years or so. So I'm excited to catch up with him on this virtual road trip. Welcome to the show, Robin.
Thanks, Dan. I'm glad to be aboard.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. I wish we were in the car together, cruising around someplace.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so take a couple minutes, warm-up lap around our favorite racetrack since you're a racer, and just tell people who you are.
All right. Well, again, thanks, Dan. Again, Robin Sparrow, as some people like to refer to me, as two birds, one man. I was born in West Palm Beach, Florida. In 81, I came on up to Washington, D.C. to go to architecture school and have resided in the Washington, D.C. area ever since. Only kid, spoiled rotten. But anyway, I finished architecture school. Like I said, stayed in the area, met my lovely wife who worked in the same building as I did, and we were engaged very quickly. And we've been married 33 years this October. She's a saint. I left architecture eventually after 13, 14 years and went into project management, which is where I spent the next over 30 years before I retired 4 years ago. Been very blessed in that regard. I'm a car enthusiast, as Dan has mentioned. I did do some racing for 4 or 5 years with National Automotive Sport Association. Have traveled extensively. We love to travel. We also have done some sailing. We're actually going to the BVI's in January of next year for a week of sailing with friends. And when I sold the race car, this is just a funny little side note. When I sold the race car at retirement, which was a promise I had made to my wife, Suzanne, I then decided that I always wanted to ride a motorcycle.
Okay.
So I went out and bought a motorcycle. And of course, she was like, "You were safer in that race car."
Yeah.
And she's not lying about that. But anyway, and that's where I am today. I do some artwork, a lot of reading and traveling. So that's about me.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, and we'll dig into a few of those as we travel along here.
Okay.
Is Dan the road trip guy? Love to hear about cars and road trips. So what was your first car way back?
Way back was a 72 Volkswagen Squareback.
All right.
Yeah, a manual, of course. And that poor little car, before two quick little stories, Dan. One before I even got my driver's license, we were getting ready to go on a vacation in it. I was so proud of myself because I washed it and waxed it to make it all pretty for the road trip. And then I promptly was backing. It was on the front lawn, and I promptly was backing it back onto our driveway, and I wrapped the left front fender around a tree.
Oh.
Mom and Dad were not too pleased about that. My dad, especially my mother, but my dad initially was like, "Wow," and then he kind of got over it. And then the second little thing, I can have very fond memories after I got my driver's license out west of where I had grown up in West Palm. They had what they called the shell pits, where they would dig not very far down, and they would take shells to mix with asphalt base.
Okay.
And they, of course, they wouldn't have to dig very far, and all of a sudden they'd be in the water. So there were all these raised roads, if you will, and then just water. But oh my goodness, you could go out there in your car, they were unchecked, and just have a blast throwing yourself around. And I did that with my buddies, all in the back seat and the front seat, and knocking our heads on the roof of the car, and it beat the poor little tar out of that car. But we had a lot of fun in that car.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds fun. Nothing like those first car stories for sure.
Exactly.
Hey, I said in the introduction, you just took an epic road trip with your wife out west, which looked spectacular with some pictures I saw. But any other epic road trips in your life that just stand out to you?
There's kind of two, and I would say that both of them were when I traveled across the country. And the first time I went by myself, Dan, and it was a little over 2 week trip, and that was fun. But I think really the most epic road trip I did in 2020, and I did it with my 85-year-old mother, who has since passed on. But we spent 34 days. I went and picked her up in North Florida at a retirement community, and we ventured 12,000 miles across the country and back. We went to 15 national parks. That was epic. And you can only imagine sticking my mom, an 85-year-old woman at the time, in a BMW M3 and just getting on with life across the highways and back roads. Sometimes it was a little white knuckle, which I was having fun. She wasn't. But we saw, she had never been out west and seen any of these parks. And it was just really special to be able to do that with her. I've also had some epic road trips in Europe with Suzanne, but I think the most epic was really 34 days in the car with my mom.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's something most people don't get to do. And I tell people today that have family living or whatever, that you need to sit down with them and record the stories, because the minute they die, you're going to realize you don't have the stories. So I would think in 34 days, you probably picked up some new stories.
I certainly did pick up some new stories. And, I tried to keep a diary. I kept a diary, Dan, but I didn't record many of the stories in the diary that she had told me. But your point is well taken, because at the end of the day, when I got home, what I really wish I had done, Dan, was taken a tape recorder.
Yeah.
And when she had started one of her stories, I could have just said, "Hey, Mom, let's wait," and then recorded it. And I think that would have just been fantastic. Some of her stories, when she was growing up, you could write a book about,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So many lost stories there.
Exactly.
Well, that's great. What a fun trip. 12,000 miles is not a short distance either.
Well, she wanted to go to her mother's grave. She's from Chicago.
Okay.
She's just one of seven, and unfortunately, she was the last of seven. Her mother died in childbirth, giving birth to her. Just for a side note, Dan, real quick, what was very weird is I had never been to my grandmother's grave.
Oh, wow.
And my mother was born, obviously, on the day her mother died. So you were looking at this gravestone, which is March 20th. It was 1936, I believe. Yes. I was born on my mother's birthday.
Okay.
So here I am looking at this gravestone, and all of a sudden this March 20th date was just like front and center.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird. You know what I mean?
Oh,
but
yeah.
Anyway,
sure.
Yeah, we did that. And then we headed north across Badlands, Yellowstone. We didn't get to Yosemite, or not, we did get to Yosemite. We didn't get to Glacier. Sorry. There were a lot of fires that year, if you remember.
Yep.
And we were supposed to go into San Francisco and South Lake Tahoe, but they were just chock full of smoke. And I was like, I don't feel like taking my 85-year-old mother into areas where we're never going to get out of the hotel.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So, and in fact, we did make it to Yosemite, and the next day they closed it.
Oh, wow.
They closed the park. But we made our way down into Utah, Zion, Bryce, the Grand Canyon, through Death Valley. It was just an epic trip. It was incredible.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's cool. Hey, let's shift gears. We'll call it shifting gears. Didn't really know what you did for a living. You mentioned it there early on, architecture and construction. Talk about that for just a little bit, how you got into that and what drove you to be an architect.
Growing up for 3 years running, just before I went to high school, my family and my mom, as I said, was from the Chicago area. My dad grew up in a very small town south of Chicago by maybe, 200 miles or so, called DeLand, Illinois. It's very close to the Illinois-Indiana state line. My grandfather had moved to Danville, which is a little bit bigger town. For the summers, 3 years running, I was shipped off to my grandfather's, and he lived out in a rural community across from a dairy farm. I would work part of the time on the dairy farm, which was just amazing, and it made me very aware of not wanting to be a farmer, but more importantly, it's like what a hard life those people live.
Absolutely.
I'm like, oh my goodness, it's just incredible. And then for that was probably 6 weeks, and then for 3 weeks I'd go, or 2 weeks I'd go up to Chicago to my mom's aunts, and they would take me fishing in Canada. My uncle at the time was a big fisherman. Back to how I got into architecture. My grandfather was very artistically inclined. In fact, at one point, he had considered working with Hallmark cards to do card design and paintings for the front of cards.
Oh, wow.
But he did some real small architecture type design for residential work back in Danville. And then he also painted. He was an artist. He worked with acrylics and oils. Now, well, let me back up. With the architecture, watching him design these things, and then he would get somebody to help him do some of the constructions. These were additions, Dan. They weren't new houses. I was really fascinated by this, and I was like, wow, who gets to decide what a house looks like? Who decides what, that building looks like? And so I took a real keen interest to it. And that's when I decided, probably a junior in high school, that I wanted to be an architect. And I fulfilled that dream.
Yeah.
Went to school and got my license, and it was a great career for what little bit I had in it. It helped me promote me into project management. So that's how that all happened.
Kind of cool that it was your grandfather.
Yeah.
So, Robin, you told me before we started recording that you had a really funny story from your college days when you were studying to be an architect. Tell me that story. I got to hear it.
This was a summer of '85, and I was part of a foreign studies abroad program with Catholic University, and we were in Rome. We started in Rome for the summer. With a day off, my bunkmate and I had decided to revisit the Vatican in St. Peter's. And as we're walking in, there's a mass going on, and the mass was being conducted by a newly appointed or ordained, whatever the hell you want to say, cardinal. And at the end of his little mass, he tells the 150 people that are there that if they have the golden magic ticket, that they can go visit the Pope with a private audience. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Okay. Processing
out, my bunkmate recognizes a priest from his own parish in Scranton, Pennsylvania. What are the odds, right?
Yeah.
We watch where they go into the door. We go knock on the door. Sure enough, the priest comes over in a few minutes. Tom, that was my bunkmate's name. Tom, what are you doing here? Architecture school, blah, 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 blah. Hey, do you want to go see the Pope? We're like, sure, why not?
Yeah.
So back through the back alleys, we go to this modern auditorium. And sure enough, Pope comes out, and it's Pope John Paul. And then he comes down into the crowd, and I was blessed, call whatever you want to call it again, Dan. I got to shake his hand.
Wow.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen very often. It's total serendipity, just total luck that this happened. So a couple of days later, I'm talking to my parents on the telephone for the first time, and I'm relaying this story. And my mom, I'm an only child, and I never knew that she had thoughts like this. But anyway, she starts to weep.
Okay.
And, I'm like, Mom, what's wrong? Right. And she's like, oh my God, you met the Pope. You touched his hand. You held his hand. He held your hand. And she goes, it's a sign. And I'm like, a sign? She goes, yes, I knew it. You were meant to be a priest. My dad's on the other line, and he just burst out laughing. And her name was Cora. And he's like, Cora, that is never going to happen. To which I said, amen, Dad.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was just unrelated to architecture and just total serendipity and luck that all of that happened. But man, my mom was convinced I was going to become a priest.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great story. Wow. Spent the rest of your career managing projects. Huh?
Yeah, in managing projects, yeah. There's maybe a company that people on might be a little older that had heard about MCI. I don't know if you remember that telecommunications company.
Yeah, I remember MCI. And I think that was my first email account back in the day.
I was working for a large architectural firm here in D.C. that was actually headquartered out of Baltimore. We had been hired, won a contract with them to do a new 800,000 square foot building, which was out by Dulles Airport. And back in that day, Dan, there was nothing out by Dulles Airport. Now it's surrounded by millions of people and businesses. About 3 or 4 months into that, I got a phone call from the person over at MCI, and they said, hey, listen, we have a position open here at MCI. We'd like for you to apply for it. You're going to have to beat out other people, obviously, but we'd like for you to apply for the position. And that's what I did. And I was hired, and it literally took me from one side of the table to the other side. I was now working for the actual owner, who was paying for the building and the architects and hiring those architects and contractors. It was a huge step up the corporate ladder, if you want to call it that. And then I just stayed in that. I left MCI and I went to a real estate firm, which at the time was called Studley, headquartered out of New York. But they were tenant representatives. So you would go to them and say, I'm looking for a building to either build or a building to rent or just space to rent within a building. And then I managed those types of projects and just stayed in that field and realm, if you will, ending up at JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle, where I finished my career.
Nice career. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah. But now, following you on social media, you've switched from building design and you're an artist. Have you always been an artist and this is just not coming out, or what's the story there?
Dan, I've always had an interest in it. And of course, when you're in architecture, you're always doodling something.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I always had a keen interest in watercolors. As I was talking about my grandfather, I really wish that I enjoyed watching him paint, but I never took up the brush or anything when I was with him. And it made me wish I had when I was with him. But I always, he like I said, he worked in oils primarily. And I just loved watercolors. I just think that there is a radiance about them. And so I wanted to take up watercoloring. And of course, it's probably one of the hardest mediums to work with, but I really enjoy it. And I've learned a lot since I've taken it up in retirement. I've watched countless YouTube videos, Dan. And slowly but surely I'm getting better. And I have also taken up acrylics. And the thing I like about the acrylics is not only the medium. I think it's very fun. It's not my favorite, but I'm working on bigger canvases with acrylics where I'm totally intimidated on big pieces of white paper with watercolor. And I don't know what it is what it is. But again, inspired by my grandfather, and it's something I always wanted to do, and I'm just having a blast at it.
Yeah.
One of the fun things is taking along, on our travels is just a small sketchbook, a little tiny travel watercolor set, taking a few minutes and doing quick little sketches and splashing a little bit of color on them and just having fun and recording kind of your environment that you're in, Dan, versus, taking your camera, your phone and taking a picture.
Sure. Wow.
It makes you look at things a little differently. And I also enjoy doing that.
Oh, that's cool. Thanks. Now, do these pieces stay in your house, or do you sell them, or what happens?
No, they they stay in the house. If anything, I haven't sold any pieces.
Okay.
I give them away. I just give them away, Dan. If somebody sees something that they really like, I'll give it to them. I'll usually have it framed for them, and I'll send it to them.
Oh, good for you.
If you ever see something on my Facebook page that intrigues you and you'd like to have it, you just need to let me know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Traveled a lot. You've seen some things. Anything on your bucket list that you want to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think I mentioned earlier, we've traveled extensively through Europe, and there's more parts of that we'd like to see. But I think what our next big epic trip is possibly South America.
Okay.
Over the winter, next winter, or Australia and New Zealand.
Okay.
I think is really the next big, if you want to call it epic, that would be it. I will tell you, Dan, that we're headed to the UK September, October for nearly 5 weeks this year. So, and that's a driving tour.
Okay, so, good. Yeah.
Yeah. So that will be fun as well.
We'll have to make a lap out of it somehow, so that you see.
Oh, it's basically a lap. If you saw the itinerary, it's go around up the east side, go across Scotland, and come down the west side through Wales and whatever.
Oh, wow, nice. We did that in Ireland last year and did a lap of Ireland. This year I told you we're going to do Spain and Portugal, and it looks like a lap. I guess once you've done one lap, everything looks like a lap when you take a trip.
That's you got it.
If you could take a road trip with anyone, living or deceased, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you drive? Maybe that Volkswagen. What would you talk about?
Dan, this may sound a little strange, but I would like to do a trip. He's deceased now, unfortunately, with my father-in-law. Suze is her stepdad, but he was a really great man. I would want to do a trip with him, and here's why and where. First of all, I'd say I'd like to do a big epic road trip in Europe with him. And the reason is because he was at 17 years old, he joined the Army.
Okay.
And he was in the Army Corps of Engineers in World War II.
Wow. Okay.
And he was actually at the Battle of the Bulge.
Okay.
There's some family debate about where, in fact, he had an appendectomy procedure done, whether it was in the field or it was actually in the town of Bastogne. But I don't think it went very well. The poor scar the man had was just incredible. Looked like a butcher had gone to him when he wore his bathing suit. But the reason I would like to do that with him was he was very hesitant to talk about his stories and what he not only witnessed and saw, I think, during the actual war, but then after the war when he was in Germany. And I think he was involved with freeing some of the camps.
Okay.
It really soured him on Europe. Suze and I, my wife, again, having traveled to Europe, he just couldn't understand what we saw in Europe. And I would want to take him back to places that he had been to see, I think, how maybe the country had healed and how things had been rebuilt and that it was a good place. I think he just had such bad memories of it, is that I've seen it and I don't want to see it again. And I think the stories that he could tell, and he was just a delightful man. I mean, he was just a hoot to be around, never not laughing. I think would just be an incredible journey.
Yeah, that would be fun. And yeah, I would have to agree with you. You know, you see it during a wartime and then you see it now, it'd be dramatically different. And I think he'd have a different view of it.
Yeah.
For sure.
And he was a car guy too.
Yeah.
So, but I think you also asked what car I would do it in.
Yes, of course.
Well, I am a BMW guy, right?
Absolutely.
I had the privilege, if you will, of driving the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course through BMW and Mike Renner, which you know.
Yep.
It was in the new competition package M3, the one with the piggish nose on it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I drive the next model year earlier M3. That car, Dan, was just phenomenal, right, on the track. And people said to me when I got home, they were like, well, Robin, but the thing is so hideous looking, right? and I said, oddly enough, when you're driving it, you can't see that snout.
Exactly.
So who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
Who cares? But I said, performance-wise, that car is just phenomenal, and it had lots of room. I'd probably say let's get in a 2024 M3 competition package and have at it.
Yeah, have fun.
Exactly. Maybe even do a couple laps on the Nürburgring.
Yeah, why not? You're there, right?
Right.
Hey, well, Robin, coming to the end of our virtual trip, but you've had a successful career. You've had some great trips. Any advice you would leave with people just on living life, whatever that looks like?
I would say in my own life, it's listen to people, especially sometimes before you speak. It's work hard. My parents put a good work ethic in me. Read.
Yep.
Read. I like history. I think there's a lot to be learned from history, and there's some great authors out there that they make it interesting such that you don't want to put a bullet through your head, Dan.
Right.
Honesty, be honest, and treat people the way you would like to be treated. Treat them well.
Yeah.
I think in the rewards will come. My real quick, I didn't get to see my father before he passed. He was sick, and I was en route home, and he passed before I could get to him. And I think he knew his time had come. And he had a book of poems by Kipling. My mom hands me this book of poems, and it's got a bookmark in it. And she goes, your dad told me that he wanted you to have this. I'm like, okay. And I open up the book eventually, and I go to the bookmark, and it was the poem that I'm sure you and many of your listeners have heard by Kipling, called If. It was clearly my dad talking to me, I think, and giving me advice.
Absolutely.
That he had probably never given to me before.
Yeah.
At least that directly. So those are some of the central lessons of that poem.
Love it. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, Robin, it's been a pleasure to take a little virtual road trip with you and catch up on some things I didn't know about you. So I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dan. It's been great talking with you.
Sir, I always give my guests the opportunity to give a shout out to whatever, charity, business, but since you're retired, you don't sell your paintings. I don't know. Is there anything you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, one of the things that I was so passionate about on the One Laps of America that I participated in, I was working for a cause for in promoting a cause for a gentleman that had actually kind of gotten me to the track eventually. I always had a passion for it, but he was suffering from prostate cancer and he passed on. And he had always talked about doing the one lap. And so that's how that started. I don't know if you were aware that I was raising money for an organization called Zero, the End of Prostate Cancer.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I eventually served on its board for 4 years. And I'm really happy and proud to say that in those years that we did the one lap, man, we raised $800,000.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay.
For my thing was about awareness for men to get screened.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to get screened. And I would still promote Zero. They're real kind of a grassroots organization based in Alexandria, Virginia here.
Okay.
And they're doing good things.
Okay.
So
do you know their website?
It's zerocancer.org.
Okay. Great. I'll put that in the show notes and people can check that out. Well, Robin, it's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you maybe next May on One Lap. Until we meet up again, you can find me on the internet at dantheroadtripguy.com. I hope you will follow this podcast so that you don't miss any upcoming episodes, and share it with your family and friends so that they can enjoy the stories of my guests also. Until we meet again on a future episode, keep having conversations with each other and keep driving.